Good afternoon, Year 8. So, we're going to be doing today's lesson as a video. Unfortunately, I'm having to stay home today as my daughter is ill, and so I'm having to look after her. And so instead I'm recording you this video lesson. Now, we're going to do it much as we would have done anyway. Now, you've got on the board the starter. Usually I'll be honest, pick a different diagram each lesson. I'm trusting you in this case not to simply look back at your answers from last time because they are the same numbers as last time. But again, this diagram of the lungs and the surrounding bits, the surrounding tissues and organs, I'd like you to write down 1 to 11 in your books, the back of your books most likely, and write down next to each number what each bit is. The only thing you won't be asked about in your test, your next test on breathing, will be number 11 here, and numbers 2 and 3. Those will not be on your test, but still worth knowing. So, if you wouldn't mind pausing me, it should take you about 2 or 3 minutes. So, there's the lungs. So you've got, we'll start at the top. I know it's the last number, but number 11 is the larynx. It's your voice box. Going down, you have number 1, which is your trachea. Your trachea leads down to number 10 here, which is a bronchus, or you could say it's 2 bronchi. Once it enters the lungs, it's no longer a bronchus, so we've got 9, 8, and 7 are all bronchioles, all small tubes, leading down to number 5 here, which is an alveolus. Now the letter 6 here is just referring to the lung itself. Number 6, excuse me. Now around the alveolus you will find blood vessels. For what it's worth, 3 is a vein or venial, and 2 is an artery, and these little tiny things down here are capillaries. Now number 4, the tube leading into the alveolus, is also a bronchiole. So numbers 4, 7, 8, and 9 are all bronchiole. Tiny tubes leading into the alveolus. Now, last lesson, we had to stop kind of halfway through our thought. I'm going to play you a video now, which is 3 minutes long, on the thought we were touching on. So I'm going to play it, hopefully you'll be able to hear it. If you can't hear it, your teacher will have a note as to which video it is anyway, so they can play it themselves. So let me just pull that video up. It should look like that. Sorry, gents. So hopefully everybody remembers from year 7, and also from us mentioning it last week, the diffusion happens from high to low concentrations. The reason there's a higher concentration of oxygen in your alveolus than your blood is because all the oxygen in your blood is used up for respiration, for burning glucose, to release energy. And so you have very little oxygen in your blood. But you have a lot of oxygen in your alveolus because you keep breathing it in. There's a lot of carbon dioxide in the blood because that's what's made when you do respiration. There's almost no carbon dioxide in the alveolus because there's very little in the air. So there's a higher concentration of carbon dioxide in the blood than the alveolus, so it moves into the alveolus.
Now then, oxygen, as we've already said, is constantly being supplied.
Now, I don't mean to be rude to the person who wrote this ideal answer, but it's not very good. If you just wrote the words 1 cell thick there and didn't explain why it was a good thing, you would not get any marks, particularly if when we get onto GCSE, which I know we're not at yet. The idea of it being 1 cell thick, so he said, you can see here, scroll all the way back to his little diagram, each of these walls is only 1 cell thick. The reason you want that is because it's only got a very small distance for oxygen to move. If it was ridiculously thick, like 10 cells thick, the oxygen would never get to the blood. It's too thick for it to move through. It's got a very short distance to move because it's got a very thin, a very thin wall, 1 cell thick. The rest of it's okay. Fine, I'm going to leave that there. Now, here are some questions for you to do. If I apologies, find the correct PowerPoint. This is the difficulty of being at home, gents, so my apologies. There we go. So, you've just watched the video above. I'd like you to answer these questions. So, 4 questions. Number 4 is the hardest one. And I would like you to answer all 4 questions in your books in full sentences. The number of people I've not seen not do this, gentlemen. It should be in full sentences. The tiny air sacs where exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide take place are called the magic rooms. The tiny air sacs are adapted to their function because they're magical. Right? Write your answer in full sentences so that you can read back later on the answer. Right, it's 4 questions there, about 5 minutes worth of work. If your teacher wouldn't mind pausing me, you can do that work, start me up again when everybody is done. Thank you. Right, so, unfortunately you may be able to see the answers there, that's very annoying. Hopefully it's too small for you. Right, self-assessment. Number 1, the alveoli. That's what they're called. Your answer should not just say the alveoli, it should say the tiny air sacs in the lungs where this happens are the alveoli. Tiny blood vessels called capillaries are what surrounds them. Diffusion is the process by which gases move. And alveoli have a large surface area, very thin lining, which means that it's not got a very long distance for the oxygen to go through. Moist lining so that the oxygen can dissolve and diffuse more easily. Very good blood supply and good ventilation. Now here I'm thinking that's fine, but in a test you would just have to explain each of those and why it's a good thing. Now, next bit I want you to do, I'd like you to label this diagram underneath your work so you have a diagram of what we mean. Once you've done that, we're pretty much done. This is kind of the end of last lesson, as it were. So again, if you wouldn't mind pausing me, I will give you another 3 or 4 minutes for this. How's that? Okay, so once you've got the answers to those questions and this diagram, we've ended the last lesson. Now we're going to move on to a practical. Now this practical can be done either inside or outside. I have no idea what the weather will be like or what the conditions will be like. I also have no idea whether Mr. Hampshire, who runs science, is going to want you to be outside, out and about without me being there. So if it has to be run inside, that is absolutely fine. That is not the decision of your substitute teacher, so please do not put any pressure on them to do it one way or another. Now, you are going to be doing how does either the intensity of exercise or the length of exercise affect the rate of breathing. So, let me pull up PowerPoint for that as well. So here we are, let me remove that. So, breathing rate investigation. That's the title, incidentally. The date is the 21st of September for you. And so can you please get that down? Breathing rate investigation, the date is 21st of September. So, let's start off. Right, have a chat amongst yourselves for 2 minutes. What happens to breathing rate when we exercise and why? And we're going to kind of find out the answer to this question over the course of this experiment, but I'd like you to decide for yourself what happens. Off you go. So I didn't make myself clear, but hopefully your teacher paused me with enough time for you to discuss this. If they didn't, they wouldn't mind now. So, I'm actually not going to answer this question because that's kind of the point of this experiment. Now, the answer may be obvious. I'm not sure whether it will be obvious to you or not. Probably it will. But we're going to do this experiment for several reasons. The first is in order to develop our scientific investigation skills. So basically, this is a nice, easy starter practical for the year, so that I know that you can do a practical properly, and we can do more difficult practicals afterwards. So, what happens to my body during exercise? Right. Firstly, my heart beats faster. Why on earth does my heart beat faster? That's the first question. My heart beats faster and I want to pump oxygen around faster. Why do I need to pump oxygen around faster? To get oxygen to my muscles more quickly. Why do I need to do that? So that my muscles can respire and release energy. I begin to sweat, which is to cool me down. Get thirsty, well that's because of loss of moisture. Body temperature increases. Why does my body temperature increase? Now that's a fascinating question, isn't it? I don't know if anybody's ever noticed they get hot when they run, I'm sure you have. But the body temperature increases because you have to do more respiration. Now I've said before that respiration is like burning the sugar using oxygen. Well, when you burn things, it releases heat. Respiration, for releasing energy, is an exothermic chemical reaction. It releases energy and makes you hot. Brain produces endorphins, is what makes you feel kind of excited and high, if you like, after you've finished running. I breathe harder. Blood flow increases to my brain and muscles. Tired feeling. Increasing pressure to my bones. And lastly, it's difficult to talk. Now, all of these things are related to this question. Now, the question you're going to answer, and this is what we call your research question, is how does the strenuousness of an exercise activity affect breathing rate? Is strenuousness a word? I'm not sure. We'll go with it. Can you please write down research question and then that question in your books? That should take you 30 seconds. Now, while you do that, firstly, then we're going to figure out what we're actually working out here. So strenuousness is simply how hard it is, how difficult it is, how much exertion you have to put in. So I'm saying, if you do a more difficult exercise, does that make you breathe harder than if you do a simpler exercise for the same period of time? Right. So, first thing we're going to do is a hypothesis. So there's 3 hypotheses there. If your teacher wouldn't mind pausing me, you can figure out amongst yourselves which of those is the best hypothesis. Right. So, I predict that as the temperature of the cup goes up, the time taken for the biscuit to break will go down. This is because it will break easier. And that's a perfectly good hypothesis. The first thing a hypothesis has to have is a prediction in it. It has to have what you think will happen. And they've given a reasonable enough reason why it happens. I predict that as the temperature of the cup of tea increases, time taken for the biscuit to break will decrease, because the biscuit will get softer as tea is absorbed by the biscuit, making it weaker and increasing the chance of it breaking. That is a better hypothesis, because we've taken it back to some scientific reason why it's going to break easier. And then I predict that as the temperature of the cup of tea increases, time taken will decrease. Well, that's not a good hypothesis, because there's no scientific reason in there. So, what I'd like to see in your books is a hypothesis for that question at the bottom. So I predict that as strenuousness of an activity increases, breathing rate will what? And why? Excuse me. No, there's no reason for you to be correct here. You should try to be correct, but if you turn out to be wrong, that's fine. Have a think about what you think will happen. Have a think about why you think it will happen. If it turns out to be incorrect, that's science for you. Things are often incorrect. People thought the Earth was flat for quite a long time. No, none of the sarcastic flat earther comments, if you don't mind. Right? So, if the teacher wouldn't mind pausing me, can you write down a full hypothesis, like the blue one there, for that question in your books? Right. I predict that as the strenuousness of the activity increases, the breathing rate something. This is because, now to be honest with you, you should already have done this, so maybe I should put this up myself. But the next thing we're going to do is the variables. Now, the variables are the independent variable, the dependent variable, and the control variable. And I expect you to know what each one is. This is actually one of the most important things we teach you as far as tests are concerned. For some reason at Key Stage 3, which is where you are, they love asking about this. And so you will see independent variables, dependent variables on tests. Almost every test has a question about this. So if you don't know the answer to this, then you will really struggle. So I would like you to have a look at this. I'm sorry, Tips, I can't stop yawning for some reason. I'd like you to figure out which of these goes together. 1A, 2B, 3C, and I'd just like you to write at the back of your books 1B if you think that's 1B, 2A if you think that's 2A, etc. Okay? Again, this should take you a minute or so. Fine. So, independent variable. I always remember that is the thing that I change. Now it says I investigate, that's fine. You can have independent for investigate, that would be fine. But regardless, it's something that you are actually doing. So in this case, you will be deliberately changing the strenuousness of the activity. That's the independent variable here. The thing you're investigating. 1C. 2, the dependent variable. That's the thing you measure. So in this case, that will be your breathing rate. 2A. And then 3, the control variables, are things you have to keep the same. There's loads of stuff you have to keep the same. If you did one experiment with you, and then another experiment with Usain Bolt, or that's a really old example, isn't it? Cristiano Ronaldo, that's not a fair test, because obviously he'll be fitter than you, probably. Fine. So, there's 3 questions there, and a challenge if you finish before everyone else. Can you please write down, I kind of just said them, you may remember them or not, what the independent variable for this experiment, the strenuousness of activity experiment is, what the dependent variable is, and 3 control variables. And if you get, let's say, if you complete it early, you can do the challenge. And if the teacher wouldn't mind stopping the video for a minute or so. Fine. Independent variable is the strenuousness of activity. Dependent variable is breathing rate. And the control variables are, there are loads. Person doing it. You could say temperature outside. You could say even time of day, so how long since they last slept. They might be tired, I don't know. You could say the time you're doing each exercise for. Right? There are probably more. Those are the 4 off the top of my head. I'm sure there are loads. Fine. Excuse me. Now, you're now going to go and do this experiment. Now, I'm going to talk you through this experiment. What you're going to do is you're first going to write a method and a results table, and then you are going to go and do the experiment. So, you are going to get into pairs, or maximum 3s, but the most of you should be in pairs. Should only need to be a 3 if there's an odd number of people. Now, you are going to exercise, and you're going to do that exercise. You're going to count your breathing rate. So, the first thing you're going to do before you do anything else is you're going to take your resting breathing rate. Now, to be honest, this is a little bit dodgy, because whenever you're counting your breaths, they either slow down or speed up, depending on what you're thinking. So, it's going to be a little bit non-scientific, this bit, but I would like to know your resting breathing rate. So if your teacher is going to pause you in a second, what you're going to do, you're going to look at the clock, which is on the right side of the room as you look at it. You're going to wait until the clock gets to the top with the second hand. You're then going to count how many breaths you do in 30 seconds. And you're going to double that, and you're going to work out how many breaths you do per minute. So you should have somewhere written in your books then, underneath your previous work, resting breathing rate equals so many breaths per minute. So if your teacher was to pause you for a second, you could do that now. Work out your resting breathing rate, please. Right. So you've got your resting breathing rate. Now, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to once you've written your method and your results table, so after this bit, you're going to pair up and you're going to pick 5 exercise types. Now, I would pick something like walking, jogging, running, press-ups, sit-ups, maybe, something like that. Don't hurt yourselves, right? If you can't do press-ups, don't do press-ups, right? Pick something you can do. Jumping jacks, star jumps, skipping, I don't care, right? Anything. And you're going to work out what you think the strenuousness of that activity out of 5 is. A little bit subjective, that one. So let's say I said, right, well, walking is 1, jogging is 2, running is 3, I think press-ups are quite hard, 4, and sit-ups, can barely do them. That's 5 out of strenuousness. Okay, so you're going to give each activity a strenuousness rating. So you've picked 5 exercises, you do that later, give each one a strenuousness rating, and write that down. You are then going to do each exercise for a set period of time. I would argue about a minute is perfect. What's going to happen is, one person is going to do the timing, while the other person exercises. So the person exercising will exercise for a minute. Let's say they started with the walking. They'd walk around for a minute, while the other person times them to make sure they're doing a minute. At the end of the minute, the person who's walking will take their breathing rate in breaths per minute, and then they will swap. So the person who was timing will now do some walking, and the person who was walking will now do the timing. You're going to do that for each exercise type. And the reason we swap, we don't do it at the same time, is to give the people time to get their breath back for the harder exercises. Okay? So, go through that one more time. You pick 5 exercise types. You give each one a strenuousness rating out of 5. Make it up yourself. Write that down. Then you pick a person to do your timing and a person to do the exercise. The person who does the exercise for 1 minute, while the other person times them, and at the end of it, the person who did the exercise counts their breathing rate. You then swap around. Each person does all 5 activities, and if you get time, I'd like you to do 2 repeats. So you're going to do effectively 15 exercises, 3 repeats for each one. So 1 and then 2 more repeats. But see how much time you get. You're going to record your breathing rate in a table. So you're going to need to design a results table. And then, at the end of it all, we're going to draw a graph and write a conclusion. And that will be the end. Wonderful. So, what I'm going to ask you to do then is to write a method for this, a numbered method. And then, I'm going to get you to draw a results table. Those 2 together will probably take you about 5 minutes to do. So, the teacher's going to pause the video, and then you're going to get on with it. And I no doubt the teacher will be walking around the room just checking how you're getting on, and they'll stop everybody when most people are done. So pause me now, please. Right, so hopefully you've got your method and your results table. Now let me show you what the results table should look like. So I'm going to pull up my own little Excel spreadsheet, let's say. Something like that. It's my memory to do House 11 aside. So the results table is going to look like exercise type is your first column, followed by strenuousness. See, Excel thinks it's a word, fine. Then you're going to have to kind of stick a row in here for me, but you could just write it above. Breathing rate for each repeat. And then you're going to have 5 exercise types, walking, I'll just do 3, jogging, running. So I would think strenuous 1 out of 5, 2 out of 5, 3 out of 5. Then I would do it. I get my breathing rate at the end of walking for a minute. I don't know, maybe I'm a turtle and I have a really slow breathing rate of 5, 6 and 7. But when I jog, it suddenly goes up to 54, 78 and 153. I don't know, something crazy. When I'm running, I find that for some reason my breathing rate goes down to 10, 15 and 20. Now if you get these results, contact your GP, but that's a perfectly good results table, and that's the results table you should have, there or thereabouts. You might have changed the columns around a little bit, that's fine. If you're missing any of these bits though, i.e. the repeats or the strenuousness rating, add it in, it's important. Now, you are either going to go outside, in which case you should use your phones for timers if you have them, and make sure every pair has a phone. It's better if done outside, but it just depends on what Mr. Hampshire says. He might say no, because I'm not there. And he might prefer me to be there for you to be outside. Fine. Or if you do it inside, you can do it just as well inside, but do it on the spot in that case. Walk on the spot, jog on the spot, run on the spot. Fine. And time yourself using the clock if you're inside, because there's a clock, there's no need for you to have your phone. And phones are evil, apparently. Okay, fine. So, nice and easy. You can have... Well, you know it will depend how much time you have left, but I would allow you to have half an hour for this exercise. Okay? Exercise. Half an hour, so please pause me for half an hour and get on with it. If you don't have half an hour left, just have to the end of the lesson, but I think you should have. So, hopefully you've had your half an hour. Fine. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to draw a graph of this. I'll pull back my HIV and AIDS lesson. No, not that one. Let me find my lesson I was on, which is on Teams. There it is. Right. You're going to draw a graph. Now, I'd like you to have a look at that. I'd like you to tell me which you think are the best and worst graphs. So we can talk about how to draw a graph, basically. Okay, so hopefully everyone's had a chance to look at those three. Now, hopefully I would think that everyone would agree this here is the worst graph. So if I take that on its own, if I were to cover up the other two, what is it? What does it tell me? What is the point of it? And we don't know. This one is slightly better, because you can see, hopefully you can see it, be a little bit small I suspect for you this, a graph to show how the number of shark attacks changes with the number of ice cream sales. Now, again, it doesn't tell me which is which. It doesn't really tell me anything about scales or anything like that. Is it thousands of ice creams? Is it single ice creams? It doesn't tell me. And this down here is the best one, because it's a title, and it tells me down here this is the number of ice cream sales, and up here is the number of shark attacks. This is particularly shark-infested beach. They've only had 13 ice creams sold, and yet they somehow had 8 shark attacks. Now, all of these are bad because they are all using a bad line of best fit, and whenever you do a line of best fit, it doesn't need to go through all the points. It should be a single straight line or a single curve, not this kind of up along thing. That's no good. So, I'm actually going to skip through that. Yeah, sorry, gents. No, I don't think we're going to do this right now. I would usually go through this, but I want to get on with drawing the graph. So, what do we need to learn from these? Have a title. Have axis titles. Make sure the units are even. They go up in the same amounts. And record your exercise strenuousness on the x-axis and your breathing rate on the y-axis. So you've all drawn graphs before. I hope it should be fairly straightforward, but the teacher who's in the room at the moment should be able to help you if you struggle with this. There should be graph paper out and about. So to be clear, sorry, should have been paused and started. So, hopefully everyone had time to draw the graph there. Now, we'll finish off this with a conclusion. Now, have a look. Now, I usually get you to highlight and annotate. I don't think that's necessary. Have a look at those two conclusions and decide which you think is best. So, the graph shows that as the number of ice creams sold increases, the number of shark attacks also increase steadily. Therefore, I conclude the number of ice creams sold increased the number of shark attacks. This is because the graph shows this. To improve my confidence, I could have collected data from different countries. It's not a bad conclusion, but there are things we can improve. Let's skip across. I can conclude the number of ice creams sold increases the number of shark attacks. Right, that's a good thing to write. To start off with a simple sentence explaining everything just saves time. I can see this from my graph because at 9 ice creams sold there was 1 shark attack. When 25 ice creams were sold there were 4 shark attacks. Because there were more people at the beach and so will go into the sea, therefore being more likely to be attacked. To improve my confidence, I could have collected data from different countries to see if they have the same pattern. So that's much better because it uses data from the graph and it explains the conclusion. Not because the graph increases, because more people are going in the sea. Fine. So to improve my confidence, I could have collected data from different countries to see if they have the same pattern, explaining why it would be a good idea. So I'd like you to write a conclusion explaining what you found out, why you think it happened, and what you would improve next time if you had to. So, sorry, please pause me. No, substitute teacher, thank you. Right. So, hopefully everybody found that the more strenuous activity there was, the higher breathing rate was. Now, some people will have found odd results, but that should be the overall pattern. Why would that be? And we come back to our starter question. The reason is you need to breathe more to get more oxygen into your lungs so it can be passed around to your cells so they can do more respiration, which requires oxygen, so they can release more energy, so you will have more energy for exercise. And that's the end of that. Fine. Now that's the end of this experiment. Now, I'm quite happy to finish that there. Now there will be some A3 paper lying around. If there is time left, I would like you to create me a little poster of the respiratory system, showing the different organs of the respiratory system and labelling how breathing happens. So which bits are contracting and relaxing when I breathe in and out, and what happens during inhalation and exhalation. So I'd like to put that you need to put down everything you know from this topic so far into a poster, and I'll give you time to finish these next lessons. Next lesson, now this will be quite creative, get some nice diagrams of the lungs, trachea and all of that, and get as much information onto that A3 paper as you physically can. And hopefully that will enable you to finish this lesson in style. Hopefully that will be the end of that, and I will look forward to seeing you all next lesson. Thank you all for putting up with the video lesson. I know it's not as good as a normal lesson, and I will, as I say, hopefully be improving on it next lesson. Goodbye all.